If you're looking for the easiest and best way to cook ribs in your oven, well, this oven spare ribs recipe is the one for you. I have millions of views on YouTube regarding oven ribs and all kinds of other smoker and barbecue related topics. This recipe is foolproof, it is easy, and I'm gonna show you a bunch of tips on how to get perfect spare ribs, just like you see here. Now let's get started. I picked up these spare ribs from Costco today. These are St. Louis cut. I do not mess with full spare ribs. I would suggest, if you're not very familiar with ribs, get spare ribs. Don't get the whole, because then you got to deal with a bunch of cartilage. You got to deal with trimming them. Get these, you're going to have better results in general. Now they come in a 3-pack at Costco. I'm only going to be using 2 today. There's just no need for that 3rd rack for us tonight for dinner. The first thing that you need to do is get it opened up. Now be careful, these packs are vacuum sealed and they are full of juice. Now the key is not to slice up your ribs while you're doing this, and if you open it from the top, you can help keep them juices down in the pack. It's gonna make for an easier cleanup. Now today, like I said, we are gonna be making 2 racks of ribs, and I'm gonna leave the other one in here until later. I'm gonna vacuum seal them and get them frozen for the next time I need ribs. Now I don't know about you, but those look like some beautiful ribs. And in general, there's just a little bit of prep that we need to do for ribs. The first thing that I like to do is I like to look at the edges and I like to look around the ribs and find anything what we call hangers. Anything that hang off like this off the side are just gonna burn. So square it up with my knife. We got some down at this end, some fat. We'll square that up as well. Now the next thing that I like to do is I like to look at the general thickness. If they seem really thin on one end, which these both seem a little thin, I'm gonna square them up, because if they're super thin, they're gonna dry out and they're gonna cook way faster. Now, the key is, look for that bone. There's the last one, and I'm just gonna square that up. I'm gonna do the same to this rack right here. The next step, and one of my first major tips, involves removing the membrane. Everybody worries about that. Everybody struggles with that chewy, leathery membrane that comes off the back. A lot of times with barbecue, you may not remove that. You may just score that so that it lets loose of the back of the ribs. But whenever I cook them inside, I always remove the membrane, because it's gonna give you the most tender and it's gonna give you the best bite. The tip is get yourself a butter knife. What you wanna do is gently take your butter knife and slide it along the back side of that bone and just carefully get underneath it. See how I'm doing that? Now what I do is I kind of grab a hold of that bone and I just pry a little bit. If you pry too much, you're gonna tear it. See, I was starting to tear it. That's not good. Now the next and key tip here, get yourself a paper towel. Because it's dry, you're gonna be able to really grip that membrane and you're gonna pry up on that membrane. Now, depending on how well they're butchered or how poorly they're butchered, you might be able to get this in one swipe, you might not. This rib actually has a cut right here and there is no membrane above this portion of the rib, so I'm gonna have to kind of do that way separate. But no worries. Now that we have the membrane removed, I like to take a paper towel and pat dry this. Get all of that purge, all of those juices off of the ribs, because I like to control the moisture myself rather than use what is on the ribs. Now that we've got them dried up, it's time to put a binder on them. Now we're using a binder to get the rub to stick. And you're gonna say, wait a minute, we could have used the moisture from the ribs. No, we're not gonna do that. We're gonna use a binder. And today, we're gonna be using some extra virgin olive oil. I like to take a little bit in the palm of my hand, not too much, and just wipe each side of the rib down. And we just want to give it a nice little glaze, little shine to it. It doesn't have to be soupy. In fact, you don't want it soupy. You just want a little bit of oil. That's gonna help that rub stick directly to the ribs. Now for today's rub, I'm gonna be using my own recipe. This is something that I've been working on. It's got some salt, some pepper, some garlic, some brown sugar, paprika, onion powder, a little bit of everything. I'll put the exact recipe down in the description. You can see exactly what I'm using on these. I'm trying to make this as simple as possible, so everything you see here are normal ingredients that you'll find at the grocery store. No fancy sauces, no fancy rubs. You could go to your local store and get everything that we're using today. You can see these ribs here have a nice little shine to them, and we're gonna go through and give a nice, beautiful coating with that homemade rub here. And kind of hit it from every direction to make sure we've got good coverage here on the meat on these ribs. And we're gonna do it to this back set here. Then what I like to do is take the back side of my glove or my hand where it's dry. I'm gonna pat the rub in. That's just gonna help it stick a little bit better. Now we're gonna hit them with that homemade rub again. We're gonna pick up the ends to make sure that we get the rub all the way down. Now the rub that I'm using today is mostly salt, pepper, garlic based. And because we're gonna be cooking these a little warmer, I'm avoiding a lot of sugar because I do not want these to burn. Now I have this awesome baking sheet that comes with a wire rack that is made specifically for this pan. I like to use this a lot when I'm baking ribs because it keeps them up off the juices, it keeps them up off the foil, so if anything drips and starts to burn, and they're not sticking to the foil. So I get a strip of heavy duty foil, and this also helps for easy cleanup. And I'll get my wire rack back in here. And if you're concerned about the ribs sticking to the rack, depending on what material your rack is, you can always use a little cooking spray. Now in a lot of my rib videos, people ask me all the time, can I cook 2 racks of ribs at the same time? And I'm gonna show you, I'm doing it today. So I'm gonna grab these ribs here, and I'm gonna get them in here, and I do not really want them touching any of the edges. Now I'm gonna give them a nice little tug to stretch them out, and we're gonna get them on here. Now the goal is not touching any of the sides, and as of right now, we are in pretty good shape. Now we've got the oven preheated to 355 degrees. Let's get it in. 350 degrees, normal bake option, not grill, not convection, not air fry, just normal bake. And I want this nice and centered in the oven. Now I'm gonna come over here and I'm gonna start out by setting a timer for 2 hours. Now for these ribs, they're set for 350 degrees and they're set for 2 hours. And you're gonna say 2 hours, that's fast. Now these ribs in general are gonna be fast, but we're not gonna be done at 2 hours. I'm gonna show you one of the most crucial steps when it comes to checking the doneness on your ribs, and it is a very simple trick. That 2 hour mark is when we're gonna start testing them, and I'm gonna show you exactly how to do it. Now because we're doing 2 racks of ribs, one thing that we're gonna wanna do about halfway through, so we're at about the 1 hour mark, we're going to actually spin these around. Now if you're not running a convection oven, your oven may be hotter in the front or the back, and by rotating them, we're making sure that they cook even. All right, the timer just went off. We're at that 2 hour mark, and as you can see, we are making some progress with these ribs. Now the key with this test, you take a toothpick, just like so, and in between the bones, you want to push down in, and there's still some rubbery resistance here. I'm gonna check this back rack as well. Still some resistance. That means they're not quite done yet. You want this to feel like you're pressing that into butter. See, it's still stuck in there. So they're not done. We're gonna close this up for about a half hour more. Give this a little more time. The key with this test is for you to check it. Your oven might run hot, your oven might run cold. I can't be the one to make the judgment for you, so I'm teaching you how to check it yourself. Now, I could tell that these still had some cooking to do, and in general, I'm gonna see about that 2.5 hour mark is where I believe these start to get to the doneness that we need. But this test is for you to decide how done they are and how much more you need to go. Keep an eye on them, don't let them burn, but check them with your toothpick. We've gotten through the cooking portion of this here. It's time to get the temperature up to 450 degrees for the last step. Now it took these ribs about 2 hours and 50 minutes to get to the desired tenderness. Typically you're gonna be in that 2.5 to 3 hour window. These actually are pretty thick, and for that reason they took a little bit longer. But now it's time to get these off and get them sauced up. Now one of the key things when it comes to doing these ribs is about trying to maintain a clean working space. We've got the oven running at 450 degrees. Now one thing to know is if we put something in here that's extremely greasy and dirty, that 450 degrees is gonna cause this to burn up. So this might be a great time for you to actually change out the foil. So that's what we're gonna do here. Now today I'm gonna be using one of my favorite barbecue sauces that you can buy regularly in the store, and that's the Sticky Fingers Carolina Sweet. This is one of my favorites. I remember going to this restaurant as a kid and I fell in love with their ribs there, and it's kind of nostalgic for me. But use your favorite barbecue sauce. We don't need to go extremely crazy. We don't want it dripping all over the place. But we're gonna paint this up like we're Bob Ross. These are happy ribs. Especially on the back side, we don't need to go too crazy with the sauce, but make sure that you get along the edges. I don't know about you, these ribs look pretty darn delicious. We're gonna do the same thing on this side. We're gonna drizzle the sauce. We're gonna go a little thicker on this side, because this really is where all the meat is. Now for some of you, you may choose to just stop right here, but we're not gonna stop here. We're gonna caramelize this sauce. That's why we have the oven set to 450 degrees. We're gonna give it just a few minutes at that 450, and that's gonna make this sauce nice and sticky. Now that we got these sauced up, it is back into the oven. So let's get these back on the cookie sheet, and they're gonna be pretty tender, so you have to be careful. You may lose them. And it's back into the oven for about 2 to 6 minutes. You really want to pay attention, because as they sit in that oven in that hot heat, you're going to see that sauce start to bubble, and it's going to be a quick transition from bubbling and caramelizing to burnt. So sometimes it's only a few minutes, sometimes it's 3, 4, 5 minutes. Just keep an eye on them. You just want it to get sticky. You want that sauce to caramelize. You want it to thicken up. Would you take a look at those ribs? Let's let them cool down just a minute. Let's dive right on into them. We gave these ribs a few minutes to cool down, and I tell you what, do they look incredible. There's a perfect texture on there. That sauce caramelized. They're super tender, but guess what? They're not falling apart. If you like fall off the bone ribs, then these might not be for you. But I'll tell you what, when it comes to ribs, you want a clean bite. You want them to hold on the bone so that you can handle them. You don't need mush. If you're doing that, then they're overcooked. But I'm not gonna tell you how you should like it. I'm just telling you how they should be cooked. Now it's time to cut into these. And one trick when it comes to cutting ribs is to peek at the back and see what direction the bones are running. So if I flip these up, you should be able to see. See how they're kind of running at an angle? Best thing for you to do is grab a hold of this and with your knife, just follow that angle, just like so. Take a look at the next bone, and we're going to cut just like so. Those ribs are juicy. Those ribs are nice and tender. And I tell you what, it's time to take a bite. Let's see how we did. Now those are delicious and a nice clean bite, and that's exactly what you're looking for. They're juicy, they're tender, and they're full of flavor. If you're looking for a recipe that provides you all of those things, then this is the one to do it. Now the one thing with this, I may have used my own rub, and I may have picked my favorite store-bought sauce. The beauty is you can pick whatever you'd like, and you can make ribs this darn good as long as you're following my method here at Anderson's Smoke Show. And if you like this video and you like barbecue and you love ribs, but it's crappy outside like it is here in Ohio today, then this recipe is for you. And I've got a bunch of other oven barbecue recipes that you should check out, just like this video right here.